Wow is all I can say. I don't know whether to laugh or cry when I listen to the government spokespeople. Of course, the minister has left the building like Elvis Presley, but the boys are back in town. That's all I can say. The boys are back in town, as Phil Lynott put it, Fianna Fáil and the developers. And I just find it absolutely shocking beyond belief that we have government people accusing the opposition of ideology. It is utterly laughable, and we mustn't repeat the mistakes of the past. This is a souped-up, hyper-speed version of the mistakes of the past, this legislation. It is a heist. It is the legal mechanism to pillage the land bank, the entire public land bank. It's absolutely extraordinary. Every single public body, not just the local authorities, and every bit of their land, not just their housing land, any relevant land. Look at the definition. They can take any bit of land from any public body and they can do what they like with it, in effect. It is unbelievable. I mean, this is worse than NAMA, because at least the NAMA land, which we briefly had in our own ownership and then was given back to the investors and the vulture funds and the REITs and all the rest of it, who flipped it, made a fortune out of it, then leased it back to us at extortionate rents, but at least it began in private ownership. But this is the actual public land bank of all public bodies. And we are going to hand it over to designated activity companies. Every public site to become a private company. Shielded from freedom of information, shielded from democratic oversight, insulated by commercial sensitivity to do deals with investment vehicles. Wonder who they are. And third parties. Wonder who they are. The boys are back in town. And this is going to be the cash cow. The ultimate prize. We can now plunder the public land bank. You know, all of the means for that to do it. And of course, what it doesn't do, what it should have done. One of the institutions not mentioned, church lands. Where are the compulsory purchase powers to take all the church lands? Use their lands? No. They'd be able to take land off the HSE to hand over to private developers, but not from the Sisters of Charity. And all the institutions that were responsible for the abuse of women and children. No, they can keep their land. They won't be touched by any of this. But the public land bank will be plundered and handed over to private developers. Minimum 50% to be privatised. That's the guideline. Minimum, but the minister can have the power. He says he might vary it downwards, that 50%. We might get more social and affordable housing, but equally it could be no social and affordable housing at all, because he can vary it to whatever level he wants. And he can also give an opt-out even on the one bit of social housing that possibly is offered, the Part 5 10% obligation, which in any event you get on any private development, but no, even that they can opt out of. The minister can give a waiver and give cash instead to the local authority, and the legislation doesn't even that cash to be spent on public and social housing. Exactly what happened before the crash, where the private developers were paying development levies to pay off their 20% obligation in cash. That money was never used for housing, and of course it was all about incentivising an absolute stampede, a gold rush by the property developers that crashed the entire economy. But now we're not going to do it on private land, we're going to do it on public land. You couldn't make this stuff up. And no obligation. I mean, social housing is mentioned once at the beginning, but is not included at all in the essential functions, functions of the agency. It just disappears. and affordable housing defined as below market price, but then very strictly, actually, and explicitly linked to local market conditions, not even average market conditions, which might at least average it out and bring down average prices and rents on a national level. No, on local conditions. So if you're in South Dublin, where average house prices are between 500,000 and 600,000, affordability defined by this bill could be 599,000 or 550,000 or 500,000. Totally useless. Because, you know, if you live in Dún Laoghaire and you're a low middle income worker, you don't get paid more because you live in Dún Laoghaire, but you still need to live in pay the rent. Rent's 2,200, 2,400. That's what's being charged. So to benchmark affordability in terms of cost rental at local market conditions, requirement of the legislation means de facto it will be unaffordable for the vast majority of people who desperately need it. Even the cost rental, benchmarked against the market. It's absolutely shocking. And in fact, cost rental will then eclipse traditional social housing. Completely, because the land bank that the council might have built public housing on will be taken by the LDA in large part. And this is the thing that really sickens me, is that a lot of this heist of public land is being justified on the basis we must have social mix. Jesus, that's patronising. Really sickening, patronising nonsense from the government about people from different backgrounds. And of course, that snobbery is ultimately is at the base of why the Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael establishment, whether running councils, because they ran all the councils for the last God knows how long, and the government just don't like council housing. That's the truth of it. They don't like council housing and they want to do away with council housing and replace it with cost rental. But insofar as any social housing will be delivered, which cost rental means benchmarked against the market, i.e. more expensive, and social housing, because you haven't lifted the income thresholds, will now be just for the poorest of the poor. So in fact, it will intensify social segregation. It will create a new category in the hierarchy of social segregation in relation to housing. That's what it will actually do. And in fact, that's already happening. Because whereas in the past, nurses, bank workers, teachers, other public servants would have got access to social housing because the thresholds were adequate. And the vast majority of working people saw social housing as a legitimate thing to do. Because you don't increase the thresholds, it is now stigmatised as just for people on the lowest level of income. Soon it will only be people who are on the base social welfare payments who will actually be eligible to go for social housing, and that is exactly what the agenda is. And then for everybody else, we don't have rents linked to income, we have cost rental linked to market finance and to local market conditions. And I'll tell you another reason why the government refused to define affordability in this as a specific proportion of people's income, because if you're going to partner with investment vehicles, well, those same investment vehicles will also be building on their own private land in nearby areas at full market price. So if, Hines or somebody in Dún Laoghaire wants to flog apartments at €450,000 in Cherrywood, they're hardly going to build houses in Shangana, for argument's sake, for $250,000, are they? Wouldn't really work for them, because it would undermine the market. And that's why you won't define it in terms of proportion people's income or at a genuinely affordable level, because the investors you're hoping to drag in to developing public land wouldn't put up with it. That is the truth of what's going on. I don't know if there's much more to say just about how horrible this legislation is, how absolutely appalling it is. It's an absolute heist. There's nothing ideological about it. What it is, this is about greed and facilitating greed, and a political establishment that is utterly captured and has been captured always. The rich in this country have always made their money by property, exploiting property, speculation, property developers, Fianna Fáil in particular. but Fine Gael did it the same with the international vulture funds that they brought in to benefit from the crisis that was generated by the last speculative frenzy and developer-led frenzy. And of course you can add into that the affordable housing legislation that's come out, which will strap people in so-called affordable housing with a double mortgage. Not just one mortgage, but two mortgages.
Deputy, sorry to interrupt
you. I call the adjournment. I hope we can mobilise popular opinion to defeat this legislation before it gets passed and actually force in legislation that would take the land off the speculators and the vultures, which is the action we really need to take.